The village of Nibut lay where the red dust met the horizon, where mornings arrived quietly and evenings disappeared without sound. It was the kind of place where news didn't travel far, but gossip sprouted like weeds after the rains. Amidst the cracked earth and leaning mud homes lived a man named Bako, a figure so familiar he had almost become invisible. He was thin like a reed, skin browned by the sun, hair silvered with age, and his feet were always bare, wrapped in calluses that told the story of many seasons walked without comfort. Bako had a habit that made him both pitied and mocked. Every morning, just as the sun tilted its head above the clay rooftops, he would limp to the market edge with a cloth bag slung over his shoulder. Inside were small things, sometimes half a yam, sometimes stale bread, and on rare days, a mango bruised but sweet. But he never ate these things himself, not all of them. He saved the best for two small girls who waited under the baobab tree just beyond the well. The girls never spoke much. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow from years of hunger, but they bowed each time he approached. Bako would kneel before them, place the food in their hands and whisper, "Eat slowly, my daughters. The wind doesn't blow blessings twice." Around them villagers would shake their heads. A butcher muttered once, loud enough for others to hear, "That old fool, wasting food on those ghosts. He can't even feed himself." A woman at the well replied, "Madness has no cure. He's feeding spirits, not children." Others laughed. "Maybe he thinks they'll repay him in gold one day," a potter sneered, his fingers covered in clay. "Or raise him from the grave when he dies of hunger first." But Bako heard nothing. Or maybe he heard everything and simply didn't care. His world had narrowed to those two girls. Nobody knew where they had come from. Some said they were the daughters of a widow who vanished. Others claimed they were abandoned during the drought 5 years ago. But Bako didn't ask and they never told. In a village where questions hung heavier than answers, silence had become a shared language between them. That evening the sky turned copper as the sun dipped low. Bako walked slowly from his hut, his old cloth bag looking flatter than usual. In his hands was a single piece of bread, cracked at the edges but still warm. He paused near the baobab, where the girls sat huddled like shadows stitched to the ground. He crouched, joints cracking with age, and handed the bread to them with both hands as though offering treasure. One of the girls looked up. Her eyes glistened in the fading light. "You didn't eat again?" she whispered. Bako only smiled, his eyes tired but kind. "A full stomach," he said, tapping her forehead gently, "starts here." And as the stars began to prick the sky above Nibut, the villagers passed their judgments behind closed doors, but Bako sat by the baobab tree, shoeless, weary and utterly at peace, as the girls ate in silence by his side. 20 years earlier, the village of Nibut looked much the same as it did now. Dusty paths winding between homes of baked mud, smoke curling from cooking fires at dusk, and goats that wandered where they pleased. But the air then was heavier with sorrow. A drought had shriveled the crops and silenced the rivers. Hunger had become a quiet, constant presence, like a shadow that refused to lift. It was during this time that Bako first saw the girls. They were crouched behind the blackened remains of an abandoned hut, their arms wrapped tightly around each other like vines clinging to a dying tree. Their eyes, wide, sunken and haunting, spoke more than their mouths could. One girl, the older one, had a torn strip of cloth tied around her waist like a belt, holding up a pair of oversized shorts. The younger one's shirt hung in tatters, exposing a rib cage that looked like a xylophone with no music left to play. Bako had been walking home from the market with a small bowl of roasted cassava. He noticed the glint of their eyes before he saw their faces, and when he approached, the girls didn't move. They were too weak to run, too afraid to beg. He crouched slowly, placing the cassava between them. "Eat," he said gently, "before the ants decide it belongs to them." The older girl hesitated, then took one piece and gave it to the younger. They ate silently, chewing as though every bite was a memory of what food used to taste like. Bako didn't ask questions. He only sat beside them until they finished. "What are your names?" he asked finally. The older one wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Fi," she said. She motioned to the other girl. "She's Zuba. And where is your home?" Fi's eyes shifted toward the field beyond the village, toward the place where the ground cracked like broken glass. "Gone," she whispered. From that day on, Bako made it a point to find them. Sometimes they were near the well. Other times behind the cattle shed. Always hiding, always shrinking into the corners of the village that others ignored. But Bako never failed to bring them something, half a yam, a few groundnuts, a slice of bread wrapped in a leaf. He began saving food before he fed himself. The village noticed, of course. Nibut noticed everything. Whispers started. Feeding strays again? One man scoffed. They'll steal from him and disappear, said another. A group of women at the waterhole began calling him Baba Yamaskaini, father of beggars. Bako heard them. He just didn't answer. Instead, he brought the girls closer to his hut. They still slept under the stars or in the hollow trunk of the old tamarind tree, but each day they came to him and he greeted them like honored guests. He taught them small things. How to share. He would give them one mango and watch to see how they split it. How to be honest. He once gave them a coin to buy salt, and when they brought back extra, he smiled and said, "A clean heart leaves no stains." How to endure. When AFI wept one day from a stomach cramp, he sat beside her and said, "Pain is a storm, it will pass but only if you don't run from it." The girls began to smile again, first in pieces then fully. Zuba's laugh returned one morning when Bako let her chase chickens. AFI started asking questions about trees, seasons and why birds didn't get tired of flying. They were still hungry most days but not empty. And in time they began to call him Baba. Villagers laughed harder now. "He's collecting children like debts," one joked. "Soon he'll be feeding the whole world." But others began to wonder. Why did the girls always sit straight when he spoke? Why did they never steal, never beg from anyone else? Why did they say thank you every time? One evening, as Bako watched the girls finish their meal of roasted maize, he said softly, "The world won't remember an old man's kindness. But it might remember two strong girls who grew from it." Fi looked up at him, brow furrowed. "We'll remember," she said, and Zuba nodded. From that day on, no matter how the villagers sneered, Bako walked taller. Even barefoot, even hungry, he knew he was doing something the world wouldn't dare. He was planting seeds not in soil, but in souls. The years that followed were not kind. In Nibut the rains came late and left too soon. When they did arrive, they carved through the village like angry rivers, turning roads into slippery veins of red clay. When they didn't come, the earth cracked and groaned, its thirst echoing through the fields. Hunger never knocked, it lived in the homes, a permanent guest. Families thinned. Children stopped playing. The market grew quieter each month, and the villagers' patience, like their harvests, wore down to nothing. But through it all, Bako remained steady. His hut, an old, slanted thing made of patched-up wood and sun-baked mud, leaned further with every season. One corner had caved in completely. The roof was mostly held together by banana leaves and rusted tin he'd scavenged. But Bako stayed. Every morning he lit a small fire outside and warmed a pot with whatever he had. Sometimes a handful of dried beans, sometimes just water and salt. And when there was only water, he still called the girls to come drink it with him. "Warm broth fools the stomach," he would say, "but fills the heart." Afi and Zuba had grown taller, their limbs still lean but no longer trembling. Their eyes, once hollow, now held fire, soft but unyielding. They began to shoulder parts of the burden. Zuba started tending to the small garden beside the hut, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. Afi learned to balance a basin on her head and fetched water without spilling a drop. They collected firewood, helped grind maize for the neighbors, and traded favors for scraps of food. It wasn't survival anymore, it was life. Bare and harsh, but theirs. They worked the fields with Bako. He showed them how to read the clouds, how to press seeds into damp earth with prayer, and how to wait, not just with patience but with faith. Nothing good grows in haste, he'd tell them, hands buried in soil. Even sorrow takes time to bloom before it fades. The village kept laughing behind closed doors. Some, now thinner than before, eyed Bako's relationship with the girls with suspicion. 3 mouths in one broken hut? Let's see how long that lasts. He should be in the grave by now. But they never said it to his face. Afi, now nearing womanhood, had developed a gaze that silenced tongues. Zuba followed her everywhere, her small hands often clenched at her sides like she was always ready to fight the wind itself. They were his protectors. He was their foundation. It was not a perfect life, but it was stitched together with love, patched with daily efforts and invisible threads of sacrifice. Then came the storm. It arrived one night with no warning, black clouds that swallowed the moon, thunder that cracked like giant bones breaking across the sky. The wind screamed through the village, ripping at rooftops, yanking laundry from lines, and splattering rain against every surface like a punishment. The 3 of them huddled inside the crumbling hut, their backs pressed against the strongest wall. Water seeped through the roof. The fire died quickly. Zuba whimpered as lightning danced outside. Bako wrapped both girls in his arms, even though he was shivering. "Close your eyes," he whispered, "and think of dry season stories." But he was coughing. A deep, rattling sound from inside his chest. By morning the storm was gone, but so was Bako's strength. He couldn't rise from his mat. His eyes were dull, his hands cold, his breath shallow. Fi sat beside him, placing a damp cloth on his head. Zuba tried to light the fire, but her hands trembled. They had never seen him this way. He had always been the rock, the silent guardian who stood tall no matter how fierce the storm. Now he looked smaller, sunken, like the earth had started to call him back. They tried to ask the village healer for herbs, but she only shrugged. "I have nothing free," she said. "And your Bako refused to pay me last time. Let the ancestors take their share." The girls returned empty-handed. That night, as Bako lay wheezing, Fi clutched his hand and whispered, "Don't go. We're not finished yet." He looked at her, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "When the roots are deep," he murmured, "the tree will always find rain." Then his eyes closed and the girls sat in silence, listening to his shallow breath, counting each one like a prayer, afraid to sleep in case the next one never came. Bako did not die that night, but he never truly recovered. The days that followed were slow and heavy, like walking through thick mud. He could no longer stand without help. The strong arms that once lifted hoes and carried bundles of firewood now trembled when lifting a spoon. His cough never left, rattling in his chest like a ghost trying to escape. The hut grew quieter as he lay curled on the mat, too tired to speak most days, his breath like thin thread struggling not to snap. Fi and Zuba did everything they could. They fed him what little they had, brought him herbs from the forest, boiled roots, fanned his face in the heat, and sang lullabies they remembered from a mother long lost. But care alone could not chase away illness. Nor could love fill an empty stomach. The girls tried the village again, knocking on doors, begging for leftover porridge, for old blankets, for help with medicine. Most turned them away with tight lips or downcast eyes. Some offered words instead of help. "Let the spirits decide. He's lived long enough. It's not our duty." A few gave rotten fruit or crumbs barely fit for birds. The healer remained unmoved. "If you have no coin," she said, "then let him go to the ancestors in peace." Fi clenched her jaw, holding back tears. Zuba stared at the ground, fists balled at her sides. They returned home that day empty-handed and sat in the dark beside Bako. Rain tapped against the roof like fingers drumming a slow farewell. Fi lit a candle stub and looked at her sister. "We can't keep him alive here," she said. "Not like this." Zuba's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean we need to go. To the city. Or send money. Maybe even bring him proper medicine." Zuba shook her head fiercely. "We can't leave him. What if he—" "I don't want to," Fi whispered, her voice cracking. "But we have no choice." That night they told Bako. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes fluttering open and closed. Finally he said, "The world beyond this village, it's bigger, louder. It may not treat you gently. But if you walk with kindness in your chest, you'll never be truly alone." The girls wept. Zuba lay beside him all night, holding his hand. Fi stayed awake, packing the little they had into a torn sack. An extra wrapper, a wooden comb, a sliver of soap, and a small cloth pouch containing the 2 metal coins Bako had saved but never spent. Morning came too quickly. The sky was gray. The earth smelled of dew and grief. They helped Bako sit up one last time. He leaned against the wall, thin as a branch, his smile weak but true. "Never forget your roots," he told them. "Not the tree, not the soil. The pain, the hunger, the hands that fed you." Fi nodded, her chin trembling. "Kindness will be your weapon," Bako added, "and your shield." Zuba couldn't speak. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. He stroked her hair slowly. "Go, my daughters. Go make the world remember who you are." With one last look, longer than a heartbeat, heavier than a lifetime, they stepped out of the hut and began walking. They didn't look back until the baobab tree swallowed the sight of their father. Behind them in the leaning hut, Bako lay still again. His breath soft, eyes closed, dreaming of yams and harvest and laughter on dry nights, waiting for the day his daughters would return, not as the hollow-eyed girls he had saved, but as women the world could never ignore. The city did not welcome them with open arms. From the moment Fi and Zuba stepped off the rusted lorry that carried them over the cracked highways, they knew this place was different. The air tasted like metal and smoke, the sky forever dim behind towers of cement and tangled wires. It was a city that moved fast, faster than their thoughts, faster than their fears. Horns blared. Children wept behind crowded stalls. Men shouted. Women pushed through markets with hardened faces. The ground here was not red like in Nibut, it was gray, littered with wrappers and broken glass. Nothing grew here. Everything merely survived. They slept the first night on a bench near a bus terminal, wrapped in a shared shawl, shivering as cold winds sliced through the city's bones. By morning, they had found a woman selling bananas who agreed to let them stay in her backyard if they helped wash clothes. For weeks, they scrubbed shirts and undergarments until their fingers cracked and bled. The woman fed them one meal a day, watery porridge, and reminded them daily that they were lucky to have even that. But luck, like bread, runs out fast in the city. The woman's husband began to linger too long near the washing line. Fi noticed first. Then one night, when Zuba was alone boiling water, he touched her shoulder in silence. They left that night with only their sack and bruised pride. No words were spoken. There were none to speak. They found shelter in a marketplace, curling beneath old sacks of rice. Days were filled with begging and hunger. They cleaned gutters for coins, carried goods for strangers, and once shared a single boiled egg between them like it was a feast. But they remembered Bako. They remembered how he had shared his only bread. How he smiled through storms. How he called them daughters even when the world had discarded them. It kept them upright. Eventually, they met an old man named Mr. Ianda, a bookseller with cloudy eyes and a sharp tongue. He watched them for 3 days before speaking. "You read?" he asked AFI one morning. "Some," she replied. "Then read this." He handed her a torn copy of Things Fall Apart. They returned the next day and discussed it. The next week he gave them more books. In return they helped him arrange his stall, stack boxes and chase off petty thieves. "You don't belong in the streets," Ianda told them one day. "You have that fire in your eyes. The same kind that never dies even when it should." He helped them apply to a small community school. They swept classrooms, washed toilets and studied by lantern light. AFI leaned toward drawing, always sketching buildings and houses from memory, mud huts, slanted roofs, hollow doors that once meant home. Zuba loved words. She listened to how people spoke, argued, fought, and decided she wanted to fight too. Not with fists but with justice. They scraped by. For 4 years. Then came the scholarship. Zuba won it first, offered by a legal aid foundation for girls with high grades and low incomes. AFI followed a year later, selected by an architectural institute impressed by her drawings of rural shelters adapted to city life. They wore uniforms now, pressed blouses and skirts, and carried backpacks filled with pens, not pain. Yet every night they remembered Nibut. They remembered Bako. They saved what they could and sent it home in brown envelopes, small sums, letters, medicine packets, and prayers. "Baba," they wrote. "We miss you. We are studying now. We hope you are strong. We will come home soon. Please hold on." But the letters were never answered. Fi tried once to call the old post station near Nibut. The clerk said, "Ah, that hut? Long gone. Washed away in the last flood." Zuba tried to send money through a man who sometimes traveled toward the region. He returned with the envelope untouched. "No one by that name there," he said. "Only dry land and silence." They tried once more. It was Zuba who wrote it. "Dear Baba, we are doing what you taught us. We are working, learning, and walking with kindness. But we are tired. Your silence weighs more than the world. Are you still there? If you are, please say something. A word. A sign. Anything. We love you." Weeks passed. Then the envelope returned unopened with a red stamp bleeding across its front. Address unknown. Zuba didn't cry. Not at first. She simply held the letter, staring at the words until they blurred. Fi sat beside her on their bunk bed, pressing her hand over her sister's. "We'll go back," she whispered. "One day. Whether or not the world remembers him, we will." And outside their window, the city hummed with smoke and steel. But somewhere deep in their hearts, a dusty red road still waited. The sun was rising as their car rolled over the familiar red soil of Nibut. 2 decades had passed, yet the village remained caught in time, a place of cracked walls, slow footsteps, and dust that clung to everything like memory. Chickens still darted across the road. Children still played with wheels made from wire. But now there were cell towers in the distance and motorbikes buzzing past like metal wasps. The world had shifted, but Nibut had only bent slightly, refusing to break. Fi stepped out of the black SUV first. Her heels sank slightly into the soft dirt, but she didn't mind. She wore a cream-colored wrapper and a linen blouse, both simple and clean. Her braids were coiled into a regal bun. Zuba followed in a deep indigo skirt, her briefcase still clutched from habit. They didn't wear gold or silk, though they easily could have. Their faces were serious, calm, but in their eyes was a storm of feeling neither time nor success could sweep away. Word spread like wind. The children were the first to notice, peeking from behind huts. Then the women. Then the men. A small crowd gathered, some in curiosity, others in awe. "Is it them?" whispered an older woman. "No, it can't be. The girls with the broken sandals? But look at them now. They came back in a car like ministers." Someone dared to ask, "Who are you?" Zuba turned, her voice steady. "We are Afi and Zuba. The girls who used to sit under the mango tree with Bako." The murmurs grew louder. Afi added, "We came to see him. To thank him." "Where is he?" Silence. Then an old man, bent with age and holding a crooked cane, stepped forward. His eyes were cloudy, but his memory was clear. "He fed you every morning," he said, "with nothing but his hands and hope." "Yes," Zuba whispered. "And we never forgot." The old man turned slowly and began walking. The crowd parted without a word, as if the air itself carried the weight of what was to come. Afi and Zuba followed, their footsteps slow, dust rising in little puffs behind them. They walked past the remains of Bako's hut, now just a moss-covered outline in the earth, overgrown with weeds and silence. Past the well they used to draw from, now dry and filled with stones. Until they reached a neem tree at the edge of the village. Its bark was dark and cracked, but its branches still stretched upward, reaching for sun. At its base was a small mound of earth. A faded wooden plank, carved by hand, marked the spot. It read simply, "Bako, Father, Giver of Bread." Zuba fell to her knees. Not with ceremony but with grief. Fi crouched beside her, running her fingers over the worn wood. "We were too late," she murmured. "He waited. And we were too late." The old man said, "He died the season the floods came. Wouldn't leave his hut. Said if he stayed you'd find your way home." Zuba bit her lip. "We wrote. We sent letters." "He couldn't read," the elder said gently. "But he held them. Every one." Afi nodded slowly, tears falling now. "He said kindness would be our weapon. And it was." "And our debt," Zuba whispered. "One we will never finish paying." The villagers stood at a respectful distance, their pride humbled by the return of what they had once cast away. Shame flickered in some eyes. Regret sat heavily on others' shoulders. But neither Afi nor Zuba looked at them with blame. Only sorrow. Only love. They knelt there for a long time. As the sun rose higher, the neem tree's shade stretched across the earth like a blessing. And two women, once hollow-eyed girls, sat in silence beside the grave of the man who had fed them not just with food, but with the seed of who they would become. It began with the signing of a single paper. On a dry Tuesday morning, beneath the neem tree that watched over Bako's resting place, Afi and Zuba summoned the village elders. The whole village followed, not out of duty but from something stronger, guilt wrapped in curiosity. No one could guess what the two women had come to do, but whispers ran like wind through the crowd. "They will curse us. They came to punish us. They will take and leave." "No," said an old woman, her voice shaking. "They came back. That's what matters." The sisters stood side by side. Afi held the paper in her hand, her voice strong. "We have bought the land where Bako's hut once stood. And we are purchasing the land surrounding it too, this grove, that well, even the clay patch where we once farmed." There was a murmur of disbelief. One of the elders cleared his throat. "What will you do with it?" Zuba stepped forward. "We will rebuild the village." A stunned silence followed. Another man, younger and prouder, frowned. "Rebuild? For what? You have nothing left here." Zuba's voice didn't waver. "We have everything here. We were raised here. We were shaped here. And one man, whom this village called Mad, gave us enough love to last 20 lifetimes. Afi continued. "We will not take revenge. We have not come to remind you of what you didn't give us. We have come to give you what he would have." The crowd shuffled uneasily. Mothers pulled their children close. Men folded their arms. A few older women dropped their eyes in shame. "We forgive you," Afi said softly. It was those words, not the wealth, not the power, not the car or the confidence, but those 3 words that cracked the first stone in their hearts. And then the work began. Within days, construction trucks rumbled through the village paths like gods from the stories of old. Clay and thatch were replaced with brick and tin. Bako's land was cleared, but they kept the neem tree intact, fencing it with bamboo and painting a small wooden sign at its base. "Here lies Bako, who fed the hungry with empty hands." By the first month the village had changed. The house of Bako rose in the very spot where his hut once leaned. The first building was a school, painted white with sky-blue doors and a tin bell that rang every morning. Children who had never held a pencil now sat in classrooms, singing numbers and practicing their letters. The teachers, paid generously by Zuba and AFI, were kind and patient. They spoke of hope, discipline, and dreams, not punishment. Next came the clinic. Simple, clean, with shelves stocked with medicine and soft beds for healing. No one was turned away, whether it was a fever or a broken spirit. And unlike the past, where herbs were sold like secrets, the clinic offered knowledge freely. The final building was a long hall made of polished wood and soft light. It was the Bako meal hall. Every day at noon the bell rang 3 times. The hungry came, children with dust on their feet, elders with tired bones, mothers with babies on their backs. And each was given a hot meal: yam, beans, rice, stew. Sometimes there was fruit, sometimes bread. But always it was served with dignity. No one had to beg. No one was shamed. On the wall above the meal counter, in bold letters carved from dark wood, it read, "Kindness is our weapon. Kindness is our shield." Just as Bako had said. The villagers began to return, not just in body but in heart. Some helped carry bricks. Others volunteered in the kitchen. One man, once the loudest to mock Bako, now cleaned the clinic floors every night. A woman who once slammed her door in the girls' faces now stood every morning with a ladle in her hand, serving porridge. Still, not all welcomed the change easily. An elder confronted Zuba one day as she left the school grounds. "You mean to erase the past?" he demanded. "No," she replied gently. "I mean to rewrite the future." Fi added, "This is not about forgetting. It's about remembering, properly." The house of Bako didn't just feed the body. It fed the soul. It reminded the village that kindness had lived among them once, and though they had failed him, his spirit would now feed generations. News spread beyond Nibut. Other villages sent letters asking how to begin such a place. Scholars came to study the model. A traveling reporter even wrote, "2 sisters returned to the dust that once raised them, and from that dust built something eternal." On the 100th day since their return, AFI and Zuba stood beneath the neem tree again. A crowd had gathered, larger than ever, villagers, teachers, strangers. A child, no older than 7, stepped forward and recited the words written above the kitchen door. Zuba placed her hand on the tree. "We came back," she said. "Not because we owed this place but because one man gave us everything and he asked for nothing." AFI nodded. "Let this be his legacy. Not the grave but the giving." And beneath the shade of that ancient neem tree, where once a broken man gave his last piece of bread to 2 starving girls, a village stood fed, not just with food but with grace. The unthinkable had begun. Not with fire. Not with revenge. But with love. They named it, the Tree of the Empty Plate. It stood taller now than either sister remembered, the neem tree that had once shaded Bako's broken hut. Its branches reached like outstretched arms over the soft mound where he was buried. The bark had grown rough, aged with wind and memory, but its presence was no longer lonely. Around it now bloomed a small shrine, simple and sacred. A low circular bench of clay and stone circled the base. Behind it, a carved wooden frame sheltered an engraved plaque that bore only 2 words. "He gave." There were no portraits. No grand statues. Just this, the tree, the bench, and a place for stories. Every year, on the same date Bako had passed, the village held a gathering. But it was no ordinary celebration. It was called the Day of the Empty Plate. And on that day no food was eaten until sundown, not by the rich, the poor, the old, or the young. The first time the feast was held, many villagers were confused. "Why starve to honor someone who fed?" one asked. Fi had answered, "Because only when we feel hunger can we understand what he carried quietly every day." So, on that morning the entire village gathered around the tree. Large pots of stew and rice were prepared in advance, but covered. The food would not be served until evening. Children tugged at their mothers' wrappers. "Why can't we eat now? Why is it called the empty plate?" And every year, just after midday, Zuba and AFI would sit among them under the tree. The villagers circled around, young and old, the scent of warm food teasing their patience. Then AFI would begin. She told the story of 2 girls, thin as shadows, forgotten by the world, who were found under this very tree by a man with nothing. A man with torn shoes, a collapsing hut, and only 1 piece of bread. And yet he gave it away. Zuba would take over, her voice low and clear, telling how the villagers mocked him, called him mad, father of beggars, when he was in truth the village's soul. They told of the years of silence. Of the unanswered letters. Of the grave found beneath the neem tree. and of the rebuilding, not with wealth but with forgiveness. The children listened wide-eyed. The elders listened, heads bowed. One year a small boy raised his hand. Why did he still feed you even when he was hungry? Zuba knelt to his level and answered, because he believed that giving wasn't about having. It was about loving. Another child asked, why didn't the village help him? And for the first time no one answered. Silence hung in the air like smoke. A collective shame, unspoken but heavy. That year something changed. The villagers began to cry. Not with the loud wailing of grief, but the quiet kind, the kind that drips slowly, unexpectedly. The kind that cleanses. Mothers wiped their eyes with the edges of their scarves. Men looked down ashamed. Even the children, sensing something deep and unnameable, went still. One old woman stood and spoke. I told him once that beggars didn't deserve to be fed. He didn't answer me. He just handed your sister half his food and smiled. A man added, I refused him water. Said he was a fool. I was the fool. It became the first of many confessions. Every year after, more villagers came forward, not to seek forgiveness but to give voice to their regret. And every year the sisters welcomed them without judgment. When sundown came, the bell rang 3 times and the pots were uncovered. But before the first plate was served, each villager, young and old, was given one small empty clay bowl. It was a symbol of hunger, of memory, of humility. They held it for a moment of silence before it was filled. Then they ate together, not just the poor, not just the privileged, but all side by side. And thus, the day of the empty plate became more than a tradition. It became a reckoning. A reminder that sometimes the greatest gift is not the food on your plate, but the hunger that teaches you how to share. And that a man with nothing can leave behind everything, if he gives with love. Under the tree of the empty plate, the village finally learned to weep. And from their tears, something beautiful grew. The night was warm, still, and full of cricket song. In the quiet house beside the neem tree, Afi tossed in her sleep while Zuba lay beneath a light sheet, breathing deeply. The stars outside blinked faintly, and a soft wind rustled the leaves above Bako's grave. That night they both dreamed the same dream. They stood in the middle of the old village, exactly as it was 20 years ago. The broken huts, the dry well, the same hunger in the air. But the sky above was brighter, shimmering like it remembered something too. From between 2 baobab trees a figure appeared. He was barefoot in a threadbare wrapper, his beard grayer than they remembered. But his eyes held the same kindness. The same quiet fire that had once made them feel safe when the world had tried to forget them. It was Bako. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at them with the deep gaze of someone who had seen every road they had walked since the day they left. Then finally he smiled. You remembered, he said. You came back. Tears welled in Afi's dream eyes. We tried to write. You never replied. I never had the words, he said softly. But I had faith. Zuba stepped forward. We couldn't have done it without you. You did more than rebuild huts, he said. You built hearts. You made a home that even the dead can rest in. They looked around, and suddenly the village in their dream transformed. The huts glowed with warm light. The well was flowing. Children laughed nearby, dressed in school uniforms. The air felt full. Alive. Full. Then Bako took something from behind his back. A small round loaf of bread. He broke it in 2 and handed each of them a piece. Afi felt its warmth in her dream hand. Zuba held it gently, like it might crumble from reverence. Feed others, he said. And you'll never be hungry. The wind picked up. Dust swirled. And as quickly as he had come, Bako turned and walked away, disappearing into the light between the trees. The sisters awoke at the same moment. Zuba was already crying, softly, reverently. Fi sat up, the memory of the dream still clinging to her like the scent of firewood and rain. She stood and opened the front door, drawn by instinct. There, resting gently on the wooden step, was a single round loaf of bread, still warm. She picked it up without speaking, eyes wide, hands trembling. Zuba came to the doorway beside her. They stood together, under the light of a new dawn, and stared at the bread in silence. Then Afi smiled. Zuba laughed, wiping her eyes. He never left, Afi whispered. No, Zuba said. He just became part of everything. And as the sun rose, casting its golden light across the house of Bako, the neem tree swayed gently in the wind, as if nodding in agreement. In the decades that followed, the tale of Bako, the barefoot man who fed 2 starving girls with the only food he had, became more than memory. It became legend. It spread first from mouth to mouth, from the clay hearths of Nibut to the dust-laced markets of neighboring towns. Elders whispered it to children as they stirred pots of millet porridge. Teachers told it before the first lesson of the day. In church pews and mosque courtyards, the story was repeated not as sermon but as soul. They called it, the legend of the poor man who fed two girls. In every telling, Bako became a little more mythical, yet always remained human. Some said his bread never finished like a miracle pot. Others claimed he once gave his only coat to a pregnant woman in winter. But all agreed on one thing: he gave without expecting. And in return he received what most kings never do: immortality of the heart. Children began to visit the neem tree shrine regularly, not out of duty but fascination. They brought pebbles and flowers, tiny hand-scrawled notes tied with ribbon. Some sat quietly near the roots, eating their lunch, then leaving half of it behind for someone hungrier. No one taught them to do this. The story did. The small plaque under the tree now bore more carvings, names of those who had given selflessly in their lifetimes. A baker who never charged orphans. A teacher who taught by candlelight for free. A woman who adopted 5 children after a flood. All names lived on in the sacred soil beneath, the tree of the empty plate. A stone path led from the tree to the rebuilt house of Bako, which had grown beyond the village. It now served as a training center, a women's shelter, and a food bank. Its walls were decorated with murals, one of Bako holding out bread with a smile, another of the 2 young girls he raised, now grown, building homes and futures. Eventually the story crossed borders. A filmmaker from the capital heard of the tale and made a short documentary. It went viral. Schoolchildren across the nation performed plays titled He Gave, or Kindness is Our Weapon. A popular author rewrote the legend in a children's book illustrated with warm watercolor sketches. In cities far from the village, mothers began telling the bedtime version, softening the pain of poverty with the light of generosity. And then came something unexpected. A group of young philanthropists, students who had once benefited from the scholarships funded by AFI and Zuba, created something bold and lasting. They launched the Bako Foundation. It was a national charity with a simple mission: to fight hunger, preserve dignity, and spread kindness. The foundation built food centers in slums, supported single mothers, offered schooling, and above all taught children that charity was not a favor, it was a flame to be passed forward. The logo of the foundation was not flashy. It showed an open hand holding half a loaf of bread. And underneath it the words, "Feed and you will be filled." Zuba and AFI, now older and grayer, smiled when the first branch of the Bako Foundation opened in a city far from Nibut. They had long stepped out of the spotlight, letting others carry the torch. When asked about Bako in interviews, AFI would always say, "We weren't his charity. We were his family." Zuba would add, "And now the world is his village." But the story did not stop there. One afternoon, in a modern city filled with glass buildings and bright taxis, a little girl walked with her mother on the sidewalk. She wore a green school uniform and carried a brown paper lunch bag. As they passed an alley, they spotted a man sitting against the wall. His beard was unkempt, his eyes weary. A small, cracked bowl sat beside him. Empty. The girl stopped. Her mother, distracted by her phone, turned. "What is it, dear?" The girl didn't speak. She simply took her lunch from the bag and walked over. Without fear, without pity, she knelt and placed the sandwich, the fruit, and the bottle of juice into the man's bowl. The man stared at her. "Why?" She smiled. "Because you look hungry." He whispered, "Thank you." She returned to her mother's side. The woman didn't scold. She didn't speak. She just smiled, softly, like someone remembering a dream. As they continued walking, the mother finally asked, "Where did you learn to do that?" The girl shrugged. "We read a story in school. About a man named Bako." The mother's eyes welled up. She reached down, took her daughter's hand, and kissed the top of her head. They walked on. Above them, trees swayed in the wind. Some were neem, some not, but all seemed to carry the same sacred hush of a village that once forgot kindness, and then was reborn in its light. And so the legend lived on, not just in words or stone or plaques, but in moments like this. A sandwich shared. A heart remembered. A soul fed. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness is the seed of an entire forest.